All right, well, thank you all for joining us today. Stephanie and I are going to introduce ourselves a little bit more in just a second. But for right now, hopefully you've all had a chance to go over to that Menti and fill in our poll. We have just a number of questions that are going to help us guide the conversation today and make sure that we're making this relevant to what you're hoping to know for this upcoming election. So we're going to start off with, are you registered to vote? Looks like everybody that's responded so far is registered, agreeing with this sweet little nodding dog. Love to see that. And let's see, where are we registered to vote? Okay, we've got 10 of you that are registered here in Colorado. There may be some of you who are out-of-state voters. If that's the case, let us know so we can make sure that we're going to address information that's relevant to you. Knowing that there's a lot of Colorado voters, a lot of this is going to have Colorado-centric information, but that does not mean that we can't answer your other questions. So looks like we have some new folks joining us. I'm just going to drop the link. Hi, new friends who just joined us. If you can go on over to Menti, use this link here in the chat to fill in some of our poll questions. That would be really helpful for us to know how to customize this workshop to get you all the information that you need to know for elections. Moving on, our next question was, is 2020 going to be your first election to vote in? Looks like for a lot of you it is, but not for everyone, and that is great. We have lots of evidence out there that shows that early voters, people who start voting at a young age, are lifelong voters, and the fact that you're here today means that you really care and are invested in being a responsible voter that is getting informed before filling out their ballot, and we love to see that. All right, moving us along. So now we want to know how you felt about a couple of statements. We this is on a 7-point scale, so 6.1 the average was for this group, that your vote makes a difference. And you know what? I love to see that. That is so empowering to know that you can make a difference with your vote, because you absolutely can. You're feeling a little bit less confident about some of the other pieces, like that politicians reflect your values, or that you're comfortable talking about politics with others. And that last piece, finding reliable information, that is one where there's a lot of misinformation, purposefully misleading information, and sometimes it's just hard to decipher how biased a source is. So we are going to direct you to some resources later in this presentation to help you feel a little bit better about things when you're going to go to the polls if you're going out to vote. Next up, we are asking how concerned you feel about some issues that are out there. So again, this is on a 7-point scale. A lot of you are not feeling quite as concerned, and so that is a reassuring feeling also, that you feel confident that your ballot's going to be counted, that you're going to be able to get it turned in on time, and that you know what you're going to be voting for or against. So great to hear it. We're going to cover a lot of these topics as we go, so just keep that in mind. And if there are things that we need to address that you haven't seen or that we don't cover in the workshop, definitely let us know via the chat so we can try our best to answer that right here in live time for you. All right, so this was a question that I wanted to know how the room felt about this. Is voting a right? And surprisingly, actually, voting is not a right. In the United States of America. There is nothing that specifically enshrines your right to vote anywhere in the governing documents of this country. We have a right, we have the ability to vote, but it is not a right. It is not a requirement. There are countries that do require voting. You are fined and penalized if you don't actually turn out to vote on election day. But here, it is actually something that we have founded our country on. We have given the opportunity for the citizens to weigh in, but it is not actually a right anywhere within our governing documents. So I think that's like a fun, not so fun fact. But with that said, we also want to talk about your responsibility or your opportunity to cast a ballot if you have the option to. Stephanie, did you want to chime in a little bit here to talk about that?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you. Yeah, I think that it's really important for students to just be aware that among their many venues to civic and community engagement, voting is, typically one of the ones more often cited. It's just important for us to make sure that you all feel efficacious and that you know how to make those decisions, and whether it's to vote or not to vote or participate in some races and perhaps abstain from others. It's just important for students to, and really all citizens, to just know that should they have the right to vote in some ways that eludes so many communities in our country, that they feel empowered to do so, that they feel that, to the last question on the mentee, that their vote will make a difference and that it will ultimately determine kind of our pathway forward as a country. So it is a little interesting to know that it isn't enshrined as a right in our Constitution, and there are a number of policies that determine who can't be prohibited and based on what, from voting, like the 15th Amendment or the 19th Amendment. But yeah, there is no actual intervention or policy that suggests that we all have the right to vote by default unless it's removed for any other reason. And really, what's good for you all to know is that it really rests with the states. And that's why we'll talk a little bit about this, but that's why it was important for us to know how many of you are registered in Colorado versus in other states, because voting policies do differ dramatically, actually, across states. So yeah, that's all I'll add to that piece. And yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Mhm.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And there's going to be a number of links that we'll share to help direct you to resources. And so, if for any reason you get cut off or you have to leave this meeting early, check back up with us later and we can get those links shared to you. All right, so our next slide, if it would advance for me, we were asking about some of those things that you care about. And so looks like we have a number of responses here. Things like reproductive rights, immigration, education, healthcare. Some of these are pretty hard to read, so my apologies for this color schematic. Policies around gun rights, public health, climate change. These are all excellent reasons why we hope that you are being an informed voter when you are going to the polls, and that you are able to determine what policies and what people align with the values that are important to you. It's not about party affiliation, but more about that you are able to determine and decipher who is going to best represent the things that matter to you. So thank you for sharing some of those thoughts with us. And then lastly, we asked if you have any questions, and looks like we have one in here so far. Do we need to vote for everything on the ballot? And that is a great question. It's actually something we're going to address, but I'm going to reiterate it right now. No, you definitely do not need to vote for every single thing on your ballot. Just, I know that we all have gone through an education system here where Scantron tests are like, right, wrong, fill in the bubbles, got to get it right, answer all the questions. And that's not exactly how your ballot works. You can cast your vote for any of the things that you care about or the things that you know about. And if there's something you don't, you can leave that blank and your ballot still counts. And that's true if you don't vote for president, or it's true if you maybe skip over if you're going to recall a judge or not. So we want you to feel empowered that you can make a decision for every single issue and measure on there. But if you don't, your vote still counts. It'll still count for all the other things that you are casting your ballot on. And then the electoral vote, I'm going to answer that right now because we don't have another specific slide on that. But if there are any other questions come up, we're going to be monitoring this and we'll check back to make sure that we're answering all of your questions once we jump into our presentation. But the electoral college essentially is that there is the number of people that sit in your state for House of Representatives and Senate. So every state has 2 Senate votes, and then your House of Representative votes are proportionate to the number of residents in your state based on the census. So shout out if you haven't done the census yet. There's still one more day to get your census in because the census also helps determine how many representatives we get in the state, which then determines how our electoral votes map out. But basically that number, so in Colorado, I think it's 7 off the top of my head, but that could have changed, and I'm just remembering from an old number. I think Stephanie's going to look that up real fast for us. But for that, the number of your representatives and your senators is how many votes your state gets to cast towards the president. And there is 2 states where they split that vote. It's not based on pure popular vote. And for anybody that's here in Colorado, I know we have a number of Colorado voters. There is a question, a ballot question on the ballot around should Colorado go with the popular vote? And I'm not going to tell you one way or another how to vote on that, but that would change how Colorado casts its ballot versus currently the state votes for however the people of the state vote for typically. But the ballot measure would say we're going to look at the total number of votes throughout the entire United States, and Colorado will cast its electoral seats towards that total number. And there have been several calls to eliminate the Electoral College, most recently being in the 1970s, and it hasn't received the national support that it needed to become a federal amendment. But it is a little bit of a complicated issue, and we can work on getting you a link or some primers on the electoral vote specifically if you want more information about that in a little bit. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into our actual formal presentation. Thank you so much for filling in these options on the Menti so we can really help customize this presentation to you. Without further ado, okay, so now we're going to actually introduce ourselves. There's a little bit of a clunky transition there. Sorry for that. I'm Jaime Ingrisano. I work for Student Life and Campus Community here at the University of Colorado, Denver. And a big part of my role is helping do voter education and helping connect you with your community, whether it's in a voting way or community service or finding community resources. So I'm so excited that you're here with us today. And I would love for Stephanie to be able to introduce herself. She's been a great colleague on our campus working on voter engagement initiatives.
Thank you, Jaime. So my name is Stephanie Puello. I work at the graduate school office as a student progress coordinator. I'm also a PhD student here in the School of Public Affairs, and my research is actually focused on voting policies and election administration. So I'm very passionate about these topics and how to get folks more engaged in different ways, including voting. For me, in the context of more of a representative democracy, like what we have in the United States, elected officials are really tasked with representing us, the people, our needs, our values, and our priorities. So I do take this very seriously in terms of my role as a citizen. And given all the efforts to suppress voting and disenfranchise large swaths of people in this country, I think it's incumbent on us that do have the right and the capacity to vote to do so. Should we have the capacity to? So I'm thrilled to be here with you all and eager to continue this dialogue and feeling empowering those that are interested in voting to do so.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things for me, like part of my personal stake in this is I think I'm generally a critical person, and I always want to try to make things be a little bit better, run a little bit better, be a little bit smoother, whatever the case may be. And maybe part of that is just being raised in this country where we are told that our voice makes a difference. That I've always believed that I could make a difference, and so. For me, getting you, especially students, college students, really connected with the elections and showing up and making your voice heard is so important, and it's something that I really believe has the power to create change. And so, hopefully, you will get some of that out of today, because those are our goals: to help build your voter confidence and also help connect you with resources to help you make informed decisions. We all certainly come to the table with our own biases and our opinions and our values and the things that are important to us. And it's nobody's job to tell you how to vote, but rather I'm really making you feel good about turning in the ballot, checking off each little box. Like we said, you don't have to everyone, but if you could, that would be great, right? Like if you are feeling good about it, we want you to be able to do so. So we're gonna move on. So I just want to share a little bit about how CU Denver turns out to vote. We are a part of a national longitudinal study on voter engagement amongst college students. And as you can see, this little black arrow here on the screen is what the national average is, and CU Denver is consistently voting and turning out to vote at rates higher than the national average. So this one here is in the last midterm elections as recently as 2018 and compared to our 2014 midterms. And we improved our rates from 2014 and we were significantly above that national average. The next slide we have for you is the presidential elections. And once again, we are higher than that national average, where about 50% of college students are going to be turning out to vote. And we are really proud and excited to say that in 2016, we had 68% of our student body turning out to vote. This data is compiled through a comparison of our student college profile information from a national clearinghouse of higher ed database and the Secretary of State's office. So we don't have any specific information for each individual person, but we do know the aggregate for our student body. So I know our student government has a goal to try to get this up by 20%, and so hopefully to see an 88% turnout. We'll see in probably about a year. It takes a little while to compile this data, but we have high ambitions, and we really hope that everybody is turning out to vote this year if they can. So now we are going to go into talking about your state ballot information booklet. This is really a resource for you that comes from the state. You should be getting this no matter what state you're registered to vote in, and it's going to be specific to your state. If it came in the mail and you lost it, came in the mail and you tossed it, it came in the mail and you just don't know where it is in the pile of dirty clothes in your bedroom, have no fear. The Blue Book is online. And that is, again, true for every state. For Colorado specifically, you can go to leg, so leg.colorado.gov/bluebook. You can find this information in both English and in Spanish. The online version, obviously, you can use functionality like Control-F to search for keywords if there's things that you want to look it up. And inside of it, you're going to find lots of helpful information that's trying to come from as kind of cut and dry. This is what it is. This is the language that will be in the state statute. This is the name of the person running for office. And you'll also find some pro cons that people are welcome to put their opinions into. So if the next time the ballot comes up, and there's going to be a measure that you feel really passionate about, you could even write in to get your opinion into one of these materials, whether it's in the online version or into the actual Blue Book. But those are opinions. So if you are going to use this as a resource, I would just remind you to take it with a grain of salt, that they're trying to be persuasive for a reason. Looks like we had a chat come in. Okay, great. That was Stephanie. Sorry, thank you. Yeah, as Stephanie said, if there are questions that you're wondering, you need us to pause to dive in, or you want to go at the end, feel free to throw those into the chat so we can answer them for you. Moving on about the Blue Book, because again, this is really important. For Colorado, we have 11 ballot measures. There are 3 proposals to change the state constitution, 5 proposals to change state statutes, a proposal to change both the constitution and the state statute, a referendum, a tax approval proposal, and then there are items that are specific to your city or county. So I'm a resident of Denver. I'm registered to vote in Denver County, the city and county of Denver. And so my ballot was 6 pages long, front and back, because we had, who do we vote for president? Who do we vote for senator? There's a whole bunch of judges. Do we keep them or we not keep them? All the ballot measures. And sometimes you might get into your ballot and you realize that there's something you've never even heard of that you would have to be voting on. And so as a person who is deeply invested in and committed to voting, even I get that ballot and I'm like, oh, I'm a little overwhelmed. There are so many things here. What am I doing? And so I turn to resources that I trust to really weigh the pros, weigh the cons, and say, is this something that I want to vote for or for against? And we'll go into some of those in a little bit. But no matter how many times you voted, I voted in 4 presidential elections at this point. in many local races, right, city elections and midterm elections, there are always going to be things where you're just like, I am not super sure, and that is totally okay and reasonable, because the walking encyclopedia of every single thing that's going to be on a ballot is unrealistic. So don't feel super overwhelmed. I know it can feel. And even just this past weekend, I got my ballot on Saturday. I went through, I filled in all the ones that I knew how I wanted to vote, and then I pulled up some of my resources. I got onto Ballotpedia, looked up what some of these things meant, and then I went through it again. And then I double checked that I filled in all the pages, front and back, before I put it back into that envelope, right? So um, some elections are going to be bigger, they're going to feel weightier or heavier. And I know a lot of the conversation is placed on presidential elections and how important that is. But the truth in reality is that your local elections are so, so important, and it's important to pay attention to those too. So, we wanted to be really frank with you that one, elections aren't always decided purely by a popular vote. Um, as we talked a little bit earlier, the presidential elections are decided by the Electoral College. That is informed by the popular vote of your state. But there are instances where the electors for your state could just decide, no, we're not doing that. It's not a norm. It doesn't happen all the time, but it is possible that they can make a decision that is different. Um, I think a conversation that happens around that is, what if, so the elections happen on November 3rd, but then the Secretary of State's office need to take some time to certify those election results. So it's not actually officially decided on election day. What happens if after everybody casts the ballot, election day ends, something happens to the winner, the presumed winner of the elections, and then they're no longer able to serve in office? Like, what if they um, passed away? Well, then the Electoral College can make a decision then of, maybe we decide to vote for the other person because they were the next person that got the most votes, or do they decide to have that vice president assume the presidential position? Um, that sort of wild scenario that doesn't really happen. It's not very one that we expect, but it is possible. There is sort of an out for that. Additionally, some election races are so close, they are determined by the most absurd of measures. So 2017, Virginia, a coin toss. And in 2015, Mississippi had a race that was determined by drawing straws. And Stephanie told us a really absurd one a little bit earlier. Stephanie, do you want to share that? That I think this is just the most extra of ways to determine an election.
Yes. Now I'm actually blanking on this. Oh, in Minnesota. In Minnesota, they had an election that was ultimately decided by putting all the Scrabble pieces in a bag, and the first person to pick out the Z, the letter Z Scrabble tile, ultimately won. And I know that this is alarming to hear in the United States. We tend to really pat ourselves in the back for our state of our democracy. But yeah, there are very many interesting and perhaps not the most democratic ways of ultimately choosing our elected officials. So that's, yeah, something to keep in mind. And something just to add very quickly, and kind of what I mentioned earlier, that a lot of these policies are state-based. There are actually two states, and I believe it's Maine and Nebraska, where perhaps some of you may have moved here from those states. It's good to know that the electors within that state are actually proportional to the popular vote versus winner take all. All other states, including DC, do have a winner take all where the plurality of the statewide vote receives all of the electors as it relates to the Electoral College. So there's a lot of nuances to kind of keep track of, but it's important for us to know.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of local decisions are decided by less than 100 votes. Because when you think about the city or town you live in, you might not have 1 million people, right? So the number of people that are turning out to vote have a much more weighted vote because there are fewer people. And local decisions affect things like, how often do the roads get repaved in your area? What do your local schools get for school funding? Your firemen, your police protection, um, regulations about how often you can, how far in advance you can leave your trash bin out without getting ticketed, or do you have to pay for trash removal, or is that included with the fee of your taxes, right? So things that really affect your every single day-to-day life are made at the local level. And so it's really important to pay attention to those things. If you care about the community that you live in, or the taxes that you pay, and the ways that you interact with your community on a daily basis. And so, local elections often happen in the spring, sort of in the off times of regular elections. So you'll often see them in March. Um, so make sure you're paying attention to that. If you aren't signed up for ballot reminders, that would be a great place to make sure you're signed up for ballot reminders. Here in Colorado, we have Ballot Trace, because then they will also send you notifications around those local elections, and not just these big every 4 years who's going to be the president, because your mayor and your city council people are certainly having a huge impact on your day-to-day lives. And we also want to make sure that we are acknowledging that sometimes voting might not feel easy, or it might not feel right. And that can be both morally or pragmatically, like physically, for those who live in an area where there is one polling place for 10,000 people, and they don't have early voting, and they have to stand in line for many hours. And can they afford to do that and not be at work? Or even though they're given the right to take off the time, can they afford to take off the time? And so we want to acknowledge that sometimes voting isn't, sometimes you can't vote for one reason or another. And that's okay. In the United States of America, our laws are set up in such a way that you are not required to vote. There are many countries, democratic countries in this world, that do make it a requirement. We do not. Your vote is secret, so who you cast that ballot for, or what you cast your ballot for, is between you and that anonymous Scantron machine, or however the votes are particularly tabulated in that particular area. Some places have a hole punch, some places have other options, but it's not specifically tied back to who you are, like your social security number or whatever that is. It is a secret. And so if you can't vote and you're feeling that peer pressure, just know that that is one of your options as a citizen of this country, is to not cast a ballot. Stephanie, did you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, I think it's also just important to know that there are a lot of systemic or larger issues that in some ways we may or may not have control over. And for example, like our two-party system that a lot of people have qualms with. So ultimately, I just think it's really important for you all to feel empowered and informed to make those decisions for yourself, but just know that ultimately, because of these kind of greater either barriers or just other hindrances to vote, know that there are many other ways and other venues for us to continue being civically engaged. A lot of the major strides that we've made in this country haven't happened through the ballot box. They've happened through other mediums, be it protests or just other civic traditions. So ultimately, we want you to feel like very efficacious and ready and prepared to vote, but also want to honor that there are many limitations to doing so. Thankfully, we live in Colorado where they do make voting relatively easy. For example, I'm from Florida. What if I wanted an absentee ballot? Or if I wanted to vote by mail, I had to request it. In Colorado, you're just automatically sent a ballot to your address or your residence. So that's amazing, and it also gives us so many different opportunities to be able to, when there are 6 pages, to be able to research, who are these folks, what am I voting for, rather than just being there, in the moment and having to make these decisions without having perhaps the time to look these folks up. So all that to say that it, honor how you feel, honor your community, and what you feel your responsibility is. And there's very many different takes to that. It's just, of course, we want to be able to suggest to you all that voting is just one of like the fundamental venues to be able to share your concerns and your preferences, is one of the venues to be able to do that to our elected officials and to hold them accountable. So yeah, just definitely make sure to keep in mind that you don't have to sacrifice your own kind of moral orientation to vote or to participate, but that if you do have the right to, that you feel empowered to do so.
Yeah, thank you so much. And as one last reminder that especially for for a college environment like ours, where we have a number of international students, we have a number of undocumented students, and we have a number of students who have been formerly incarcerated and are now back into um, back into our just mainstream society, I guess is the way to put it, that not everybody has the opportunity to vote. And so um, be mindful if you are championing the cause of everybody should vote, and if you don't vote, then your opinion doesn't matter sort of rhetoric, because not everybody really has that same opportunity that maybe a lot of us in this presentation do today. And so we just are hoping to um, remind you to be mindful about that, because it is a really hot button topic for folks. There's a lot of emotional charge behind it, especially this particular election season. Um, and there's sometimes factors that you don't know about another person, and so be thoughtful, be encouraging, be supportive, help give your friends, your peers, your family resources to be informed or feel confident, just like we're going to be giving each of you today, but try not to put other people down if they aren't able to vote, or um, even if you don't know if they are or aren't. So just we didn't want to move on with our presentation without really acknowledging that for everyone. So here are a number of resources. We can go into them a little bit more in depth at the end. I wasn't planning on clicking on every one of these links, but I want you to make sure that you had them and we can talk about them a little bit. And then if at the end you have a question about one in particular, let me know and we can pull up the actual website at the end. But one that is really great, especially for college students, the Campus Elections Engagement Project. They're also shorthand for CEEP. They have state-specific candidate guides and voter information. They are really intentional about getting primary source information to direct you to like why they've put the following information, especially on candidate stances on issues. And they will be able to get you information about mostly candidates, but some of the bigger issues that are on the ballot as well. I should have put their Instagram handle. I didn't think about that. I should consider that for next time. But they are on Instagram as well. If you like to digest your information, maybe in a little more passive way. I think their Instagram is a campus vote. I think. Ballotready.org, another great information for you to find specific ballot information so you know what to expect. Here in Colorado, as Stephanie reminded us, we are a mail-in ballot state, so everybody should have or will be receiving their ballot in the mail if they're registered here in Colorado. But if you are living in a state where you have to go to the polls, or you are a voter that needs to go to the poll for some reason, you can fill in the ballot ready like template and then have a downloaded personal summary to take with you to the polls to help you make some of those like how did I feel about that? What did I remember when I was looking up Amendment 2A? You can go to Ballot Ready and get yourself a little digest. It's sort of like a cheat sheet, like an open note quiz. Ballotpedia.org. This is one that I really rely on a lot. They call themselves an interactive encyclopedia of American politics, but they have information about most of the things on your ballot with arguments for and against, and who is supporting it, who is against. And as a voter, I tend to look at who are all the people that endorse this particular ballot measure, or who are the people or the organizations that are against a ballot measure. And I think about, do some of these organizations or people line up with the things that I believe, or are they the opposite of the things that I support? And that helps me sort of start to weigh my options as I'm ultimately making that decision. So Ballotpedia can be very, very handy. And then if you're a person that's maybe like, hey, I know that this is important to me, I want to be a good voter, but I'm not even really sure how I stand about this sort of stuff. I side with is an interactive sort of quiz, and it has a number of topics: foreign policy, domestic policy, education policy, um, economic policy, and it'll ask you questions and you can answer, I don't know, this isn't that important to me, or I have a strong opinion about this. And that's going to help align you. It's going to show you on a sort of a chart where your policies align with some of the national figureheads in politics, to just give you a different way to think about your personal politics. So just because you're answering these questions that I side with and you think like, oh, I don't know, like military spending, like this is how I feel about it. Um, Maybe that gives you a pause to think like, you know what, like I didn't really even know how I feel about that. That's something I want to look into a little bit more. I want to read an article or two. I believe I cited has some links for some of the questions, but even if they don't, like that's something you can go and take the time to put into a search engine and read up a little bit more. Like, what is the country doing about military spending, and help you determine how you're feeling about a particular issue, so that you can then better understand where your votes, how your votes are aligning with your ballot. We also have some other resources we want you to know, and this one is going to be true for the rest of your life. If you are a voter in the United States of America, that you can go to your Secretary of State's website or find your Secretary of State to find information about the elections process for your state, a lot of general questions, those deadlines, how do I register, where do I register, what do I need to register, what do I need to have at the ballot, if I'm going to an election site, what kind of ID do I need an ID? There's so many questions. Your Secretary of State for the state that you live in is the one that runs elections. And so if you have questions, if you need to get just some of that basic stuff, go to your Secretary of State's website. That's going to be a really good first step to making sure that you are getting connected to the information that you need to know. As I said, other states, just look up your Secretary of State. That is a fairly universal term throughout the United States, so you should be able to find that pretty easily. As I say this, I realize, does Washington, D.C. have a Secretary of State since I don't have a state? That's a great question. Hopefully we'll get back to you in a minute with that potentially. I also wanted to point out for you, there's been a lot of rhetoric in the news and popular media culture about voter intimidation at the polls and information about that. As Stephanie has said, our states each get to set their own rules, restrictions, laws, guidelines, etc. around elections. And so elections laws can be very complicated, and there's a lot of different information out there. Electionary.info is a source that is out there that'll direct you to election laws. If you can't find it on there, I don't think they have every single state. They're still working on updating some of the states in the map. Secretary of State's office, you should also be able to find it. It just might be in a little bit more legalese, like complicated wording. But electionary.info, if you are going to the polls to turn in your ballot and you notice that there's something sketchy happening, you have the right as a citizen to call in. There is like a federal number that you can call to report that there's issues at a polling location. There's also elections watchers that are going to be at a lot of the polling sites, and they typically have a sheet of paper or some sort of credential to say that they have been vetted to be there. And so if somebody is being harassing to you, you can definitely ask them, like, do you have any credentials to be here? Why are you speaking to me? You can also just ignore them. But if you have something that feels a little sketchy, feel free to look up that elections law for the state that you're in or the place that you're in if you feel like something is wrong. And then usa.gov/voting. This is put out by the federal government. This is, again, helping you get state-specific information. It also breaks down some common terms. It explains some of that elections process. So if you're still curious and you're not really sure how something is supposed to work, that can be a great resource. The website also will connect you, I believe, to their YouTube channel, which has some videos. So if you were, again, curious about the Electoral College and how does that all work and how do the electors work, there are some really informative videos on YouTube that you can find. And typically when you see a .gov, it is an indicator that it is going to be a non-biased resource because it is just put out not with a party affiliation, and something you can usually trust. And I would say hope to always trust, but it never hurts to find some secondary sources to confirm what you're seeing or reading. And then lastly, just a plug for some local resources, especially when it comes to local races or local ballot measures. Look at your area newspaper. What are the things that are being said in your local media source? So for instance, the Denverite has out how to like be a part of, okay, the title is misleading. It says how to put your part of this election behind you immediately, a Denver ballot guide. But they will break down the races that are to this community, and they also have a judicial performance review. So a big part of your ballot, and you're going to see this pretty much every time you vote in a federal or a midterm election, is should we keep these judges or not? And the term is recall. That is your chance as the people to say, I don't think that this is a very good judge. If you Google judicial performance review in your state's name or judicial performance review in Denver, you should be able to find some good information that's out there on the judge's voting record and how people feel about them. That is an area that I think folks, judges don't really campaign to be judges. And they don't campaign to stay judges. So it's not something we talk about a lot because it's not part of the revenue ad buys that's going on in your newspapers and your TV and your radio. But it is something where you can weigh in and say, like, hey, like I read that this judge has a history of making unfair decisions, or they made some very questionable decisions in their personal life that I think affects them in their ability to be an impartial judge when they're hearing cases, and you can choose to not recall them. I'm not going to get okay. Thank you. All right. So moving on, you filled in the bubbles. Maybe all of them, maybe most of them, maybe just some of them. What next? Colorado residents, you can drop it in that mailbox, get it back over to your county clerk's office who's going to track that ballot. But maybe you don't feel good about it. Maybe you don't know where to find a stamp right now. You can also take it to a permanent ballot drop-off box. They're throughout the state. And if you don't know where one is, you can't find one, your absolute fail-safe is right outside of the Tivoli by where the Starbucks is. There is a 24-hour ballot drop-off box. You can drop it right in there. That only gets checked by the county recorders who come and collect the ballots to get them to be counted. If you are signed up for Ballot Trace here in Colorado, then you will get a message from the state saying, we've received your ballot, we've accepted your ballot, or we've received your ballot, we have questions about your ballot, and we need you to verify something. It's sometimes a signature issue. They try to give you enough time to do that so you can get it fixed and still get your ballot counted. So sign up for Ballot Trace so you can get those reminders. A lot of other states have implemented something similar where they have a ballot tracking system. And if you live in a state where they don't have a ballot tracking system, it's a great question of what to do. And I can't give you the right answer right now because I can't think of which states don't have the ballot tracking system, but we would be happy to help you find that information as well. A really important thing, and I know this came up in some popular media just a couple weeks ago, there's a question about ballots that were thrown out in another state. You get your ballot and there's an extra envelope in there. And like, what's the deal with all these extra envelopes? One is for the Secretary of State or the county clerk's office to record it, make sure it's filled out by the right person. That's why you have to sign the back of it, and they're gonna compare your signature to either what your signature is with your driver's license or the signature you use when you register to vote. And I will tell you, I have had some really great in-depth conversations with county recorders, and um, in Maricopa County, which is the largest county in Arizona, they actually have people that are trained, like basically have FBI, like federal forgery level training for signatures that are doing that comparison. It's not somebody's just like part-time gig where they look at it like, oh, does this look like Stephanie's signature? Like, I don't know, sounds good. No, their job is to actually be tracking. And it's not like, did you completely sign exactly the same way? But like, are the slants of your letters the right slants? Do you not loop your A's completely consistently? Like, they go through actual really in-depth training to make sure that they are able to verify signatures, just like if they're like an autograph authenticator or an FBI forgery person. So sign that envelope to make sure that your name is going to be on there, and then that other ballot is to really help make sure that your vote is kept secret. Stephanie, did you have anything to add on any of the dropping off your ballot stuff, or did I cover most of it?
I think you did. Um,
Okay, I
yeah,
just
I
wanted to
mean,
make sure.
yeah, no, I'm just thinking as I'm reading, like, especially that last point. Yeah, there are a number of ballot boxes everywhere. Also want to kind of plug, there's kind of initiatives to roll to the polls, meaning to like take more environmentally friendly, like a bike, to go and submit your ballot. But no matter how you do it, ultimately it's most important that you're able to vote and submit it. So yeah, I think you've covered everything on there. And I think for, keeping COVID in mind, if you can do it that way and, avoid longer lines and having to be, you have to wear a mask and everything, I think it's just easiest if you just drop it off. But ultimately, I leave it to you all to decide what works best.
Perfect, thank you. And then this is kind of going off that same subject, like, oh no, my dog ate my ballot, or I spilled coffee on my ballot, or I filled in all the wrong bubbles. That's okay. You have an option still. You can go to any polling center in the state. So while we are a mail in ballot state, and I know there's been a lot of rhetoric again about like mail in ballot safety, you can go to a polling center and you can sign an affidavit that you haven't turned in any other ballot, and they will print you a new one, and then you can refill it out. So you might need to go to that ballot ready, get your downloadable form so you know how you want to vote on all 6 of those pages. But you can go to a polling center. One that's going to be really familiar to you is right in the Tivoli Student Union, and it's going to be in the Turn Hall garage. So right within our own campus, you can go in, you bring your ID, they will print you off a new ballot, and you can cast your ballot. They are going to be open starting on October 19th, and pretty open times, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day except for Halloween, and then which is until 5. And then on election day, it's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. But as just a friendly reminder for you, for anybody else you know that is going to vote in person here in Colorado or anywhere else, if you are in line at 6:59, you are able to vote even if that line is 7 hours long. It's basically like Disneyland rules. I don't know if you know this, but if you're at Disneyland, if you're in line for a ride before the park closes, you get to ride that ride no matter how long it takes you to get through that line. Um, so it's Disneyland rules apply to elections, or elections rules apply to Disneyland. Either way, if you're in line before 7 p.m., you will get to cast your ballot. So if there are people that are there like get out of line or you should go somewhere else, you don't have to listen to them. You just stay in your line, you hold the course, because you do have that right to cast your ballot still. So you either can go in person because you just want to vote in person. My first elections, I really just wanted to vote in person. I wanted to get that sticker. I wanted to feel like I was at the ballot box, and yes. And really, I am an in-person voter. I love to do that. I'm really fortunate that we have mail-in voting, though, because it took me a long time to go through all 6 of my pages. So I would have taken up a long time in that polling booth. But there are lots of options. The polling center at Aurora is not the only one. There are drop boxes and polling centers throughout the state. So you can go to denver.org/maps denver.gov/map/election services, or you can Google Denver elections polling centers. Or if you're in Aurora, if you're in Delta, if you are in Greeley, put in your city, put in polling centers, and you should be directed to your county's map of where you can go to vote. And you typically want to bring an ID with you. A photo ID, state issued ID is usually your best bet. If you don't have one of those, there are other options. It includes bringing pieces of mail that have come to your house to identify you and something else with your name on it. Your county is going to give you information about what exactly they need at the polling location. So if you do have questions, you can call a phone number. There's phone numbers for all the polling or all the counties on their websites. Some of them do have like mail chat bots that you can talk to. But just make sure that you're bringing the right information, identification to the polls so that you're not turned away for a reason that is easily preventable, potentially. So definitely know that if you mess something up, you can recover from it. You can get a new ballot. It's not the end of the world. They will print you out a new one and you'll be good to go and get it. And if you know you cast it right there, then you're going to know if your vote was counted or if it was a provisional ballot. In the state of Colorado at the last election, young people, the 18 to 24-year-old range, I believe it was about 2.5% of all ballots cast were invalidated for something small. So that is a significant number. 2.5% might not seem like a lot, but it is. So we just want to really encourage you to make sure you follow all the instructions that are on your ballot. They often say blue or black pen. Use a blue or black pen. Don't use a purple highlighter. Don't use a pencil. Follow that instructions. It tells you where to sign in the place where it says to sign. Really make sure you follow all those instructions. Again, you can leave ballot options blank, but just follow all the requirements so your vote is counted if you're casting a ballot. And then lastly, we want to cover, like the votes are in, what to know next. In our age of a 24-hour news cycle and constant media inundation about the elections, there may be a lot of anxiety coming out the night of November 3rd, which is the last day to cast a ballot here. But those are not official results. A news station might say, we're calling it for this candidate. We're calling this state for a candidate. And then you look and they're reporting it based on 45% voter turnout. Is there a lot of really complicated and fairly precise science behind how a news station feels like they can make a prediction of a turnout for a race before all the ballots are cast? Yes. Is it infallible? No. Your Secretary of State's office is going to count every ballot. They're going to do all the homework. Mail-in ballots that arrive on election day aren't going to get reported the same way or in the same timeline as the ballots that are being cast in person, right? It's going to take a little time to count them. And no state makes their decisions official for several weeks. It is just sort of by a wave of, we feel like the information is leaning this way, that we're able to do those predictions on the news. But that's not the clear and official winner. That's why there is a gap between November 3rd, which is election day, and January 21st, which is when the new president would start or take their term. There is a span of time there. Stephanie, can you share with us a little bit more about a time where that has played out for us?
In terms of not a clear winner?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think did you mean another time other than Gore and Bush? Because that's what I was about to share.
No, if you can just explain about Gore versus
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I know that I was, in elementary school at the time, so I certainly wasn't voting. But both Al Gore and George W. Bush were the Republican and Democratic candidates for the presidential election. And ultimately, I'm actually from Florida, so it's always interesting that both Florida and Ohio always tend to play they're perennial swing states, and because of that, they always tend to play a really important role in deciding elections. So in this particular election in 2000, there was a recount due to issues or due to uh, the Broward County, which is in South Florida, that ultimately was contested. So there had to be a recount. And when George W. Bush won, he won by 537 votes. There are more students in just one major at CU Denver than that number. So ultimately, the margin with which he won was 0.0009%. So this is why it's so important, especially when folks say that, that their vote doesn't matter or it doesn't count. It can really make a huge difference. And I won't talk about it too much, but when you consider disenfranchisement policies, particularly in Florida, and other suppression tactics, it can really get down to the wire, as it did in the year 2000. And so ultimately, you definitely want to just kind of especially use the ballot trace just to make sure that all of your ballots are in fact being counted. If there's any discrepancies, like Jamie already kind of talked about, and signatures and things of that sort, it's not only important to vote, but make sure that you do it right and make sure that that your ballot is counted, because there are situations like this that can really kind of make it a little bit more of a contest, and to determine, who will ultimately be the winner of those races.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for elaborating on that, because it wasn't a whole lot of votes that really made a big decision and flipped the determination. Um, for some states, ballot recounts are automatic if the vote is close enough. So if you see or you hear on the news like Minnesota is doing a recount, like that might be just an automatic trigger from what they already have set in state statute, that like if a race is this close that we will do it no matter what. Other states, Wisconsin being one of them, is a state where the candidates would have to petition for a recount, and they might only be allowed to do it if their number is within a certain range. And other states, a candidate can just petition for a recount. And so, again, being a patchwork of 50 different sets of rules, and really more than 50 different sets of rules, because Puerto Rico has voting rights, Guam has voting rights, DC has voting rights, but they all have the same voting rights. Um, is not something for you to take a lot of anxiety about. I do want to give kind of a shameless plug though, that if we come to November 3rd and you wake up in the morning of November 4th and you're just like, what is happening? I don't know. We are going to be hosting a kind of like an open venting, feeling, process your question sort of space for any students that want to come in and just say like, what is happening right now? I just need to talk to people. CU Denver will be having some virtual spaces for students to come into to process. And on the Friday after, so election day is Tuesday, Wednesday is that processing space. That Friday, there's going to be a tri-institutional panel of faculty, like experts, subject matter experts, that are really going to help us break down understanding what happened or what's going on or what we can expect from here. It's really hard for us to make a prediction of what it might look like Thursday morning. But we are putting plans in place. So there is going to be information for you, places for you to process in a virtual environment, since that's what we're at right now, to really get connected to some of the where are we at now things. It's really important on that. So whether there is a recount or really close things, or maybe it seems like things aren't going the way that we would normally expect things to go, please try not to panic. There is a lot of very intentional process behind this to make sure that the elections are going as smooth as possible, that all the ballots are getting counted, and that there are protections in place to have continuity within our government. So that was just a really important one for us to throw out there for you all. I got a couple of questions that came to me privately, but I do want to answer them just for the good of the group. And one was, how important is it to vote for judges? I can't tell you how important it is, right? Like that's me projecting my values on you of how important I think it is. It is your opportunity as a citizen to weigh in on part of the checks and balances of our government. So judges are appointed by politicians, you elect politicians, and sometimes that comes with partisan viewpoints or partisan slants where they're putting in political appointees. So your opportunity to vote for a judge is your opportunity to weigh in as a check and balance to the government as a citizen. Um, if you leave those blank, you leave them blank. Um, it's they're trying to win a race, but more it would be like getting voted out. So if you feel very strongly that a judge is not doing their due diligence to the community that they serve, then it would be an important reason for you to vote on that. If you don't have a particular investment, then I would say it's probably not that important to you. But judges do shape the lives of all of our citizens, all the members of our community, whether it's traffic court and you think that there's a real jerk judge on traffic court that always sides with the traffic cameras, or it's more of a bigger picture issue for your state. So I think it's important that you look into it and make those values for yourself. But that's as much as information I can give you on that. I'd say check out the judicial performance review, and if there are people that you like, they seem fine, then you can leave it blank. If there's somebody that's like, wow, this person seems not great. An example of this, just in kind of recent memory, the case against Brock Turner, who was a student at Stanford University who was caught in the act sexually assaulting a person in their community, and the judge, when he went to trial, said, well, he has a good future ahead of him, so I'm only going to give him 3 months of a sentence. There was a big upswell of people in that community saying we need to recall that judge, right? Because they thought this judge is not making the decisions that reflect the values of our community. So I can't think of any recent memory things off the top of my head at the exact moment that are like really relevant to Colorado, but that doesn't mean that there's not. I just can't think of them in the moment. We also had a question about using ballot trace. So ballot trace is something you sign up for. You probably already did sign up for it on your voter registration, but if you didn't, you still have the opportunity to do so. It's more of a passive one-way information to you saying, hey, we're sending you the ballot. Hey, you should have your ballot. Hey, we got your ballot. So it's not something you do a lot of interacting with, but it's just a way for you to sort of track where things are at. Stephanie, do you have more information on ballot trace? I know I use it, but I can't explain it very well.
I don't. I actually haven't used it myself yet. But yeah, I mean, you kind of got to the crux of it. It's really, you can get notifications via text or email about the status of your ballot. And should there be any issues, I think it'll let you know. And just know that if there are issues, you can still get a provisional ballot. And perhaps they'll later say that you need to provide your identification or things of that sort, but really it's just I think it uses just a barcode technology to ultimately let you know every stage of where it's at, like whether it's been accepted, whether it's been counted, and so on. It's almost kind of like when you order pizza from Domino's and you can see that it's being prepared, it's out for delivery, it's been delivered. Essentially, it's the same thing, but for just tracking your ballot.
Perfect. And hopefully that answers the question of the student that submitted the question. If you do have anything else, feel free to send me another message or an everyone message if you want us to help you out any more specifically. But just like Stephanie said, it is a lot like the Domino's tracker where you just like sort of see the steps along the way of where your ballot is.
Jamie,
yep.
I was able to find the Denver ballot trace sign up link and the Arapahoe County sign up, and I live in Arapahoe and it works flawlessly. It's very nice to get that text message saying your ballot has been accepted. So if you don't live in one of those two counties, you literally can look up ballot track in your county and you should be able to find the link.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And that's just a good reminder to like get your ballot in early. Like if you are one of those in-person on election day people, I get it. And if you are not as committed to that particular thing, you get it in early, then you can see your ballot get tracked and get all the pieces and have it done and decided with. So, so that's a shout out to getting it done early. But There's no shame if you are one of those people that wants to do it on the day. I get it. I'm with you. Looks like we have somebody else sharing out what Douglas County is doing.
Thank you.
Perfect. Tirza did put it in just right now, a chat about the evaluation survey for our session. So feel free to click on that, give us some feedback. We'd certainly love to hear it. And with that, I think we have some time that just, if anybody wants to unmute themselves or ask questions, or you want to throw it in the chat, our presentation itself is concluded. But we're here to be a resource for you if you have anything else that's been lingering on your mind and you want to learn about as it relates to this upcoming election. Now the awkward silence time.
Well, it looks like most folks are headed out, so thank you very much for coming. We would appreciate you filling out the workshop evaluation that helps us plan for next year. And also want to let you know that next week's topic is intersectional leadership. So when you think about the various identities that you hold, how do they intersect to inform who you are as a leader? So thank you very much for coming.